afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining us for this Professional Development Interest Group PDIG webinar. Firstly, I ask that you all mute yourselves and turn off your cameras if you haven't done so already. This will help us preserve some bandwidth. My name is Sarah Davidson, and I'm the Member Services Coordinator here at Cabal. I'm very pleased to introduce Nari MacDonald, who will say a few words of welcome and introduction. Nari is Planning and Development Officer at the University of New South Wales. She's also UNSW's representative to the PDIG committee. Thank you, Nari.
Thank you, Sarah. On behalf of Cabal and the PDIG committee, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands across Australia and New Zealand where we live, learn and work. We acknowledge and celebrate the inherent strengths of Aboriginal, Torres Strait Islander and other First Nations peoples and communities and recognise their continuing connection to land, waters, sky and culture. We pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging. Welcome to this final webinar in PDIG's seminar series, Steer Your Career. If you have any technical questions during the presentation, please type your question into the chat and the Cabal team will help you. Many of us may have heard that once you start working in a part of the library sector, be it public, tertiary, special or other types of libraries, it is very hard to move to another part of the sector. This does not have to be the case. In evidence of this, we are joined by 4 panellists today who have all worked in various areas of the library industry. Dr. Craig Anderson, University Librarian at Deakin University, Michelle Diaz-Pura, Library Coordinator at East Doncaster Secondary College, Robin Ellard, Executive Manager, Public Participation at Yarra Plenty Regional Libraries, and Dr. Sarah Jansen, Associate Director, Collections, Discovery and Digital Experiences at the University of Newcastle. Guiding this conversation about cross-sector permeability is Marion Slawson, Associate Librarian, Client Services at Federation University. Please use the hashtags #PDIGForum2021 and #SteerYourCareer when commenting on social media during or after the webinar. If you have questions for the panelists throughout the session, please ask them through the Slido link, which we have added to the chat and the rotating slides. Alternatively, you can go to slido.com or the Slido app and use the event code #75860. Without further ado, I'll pass you on to Marion to kick off the discussion.
Many thanks, Neri and Sarah, for those wonderful introductions. And I'd just like to start by also thanking our panelists for joining the conversation today and welcome all the participants and acknowledge that I'm on Wadawurrung country. We have a limited amount of time, so I will just get started. Neri's given us a wonderful overview of each of our participants' present roles, but they all have a rich history that we're hoping that they can share with us today. So I'm just going to start by asking each of the panelists in turn to give us an overview of how they arrived at their current role and what steps they took to get to where they are today. So I'll start with Craig. You've turned off your mic, so that was an immediate signal that you were ready to go. So take it away, Craig. Thank you.
Good day, Marion, and good day to all the participants today. I'm so pleased to be here. Thank you very much for the invitation. Now, how I got here, I came to Australia as a school librarian a long time ago, only lasted in the school system for about 18 months. Michelle's done the opposite, I believe. I went into public libraries because it's a passion I've always had. I worked for a vendor for 9 years and then went back into public libraries. Now, from public libraries, I went to RMIT in 2003. It was an unusual change. I did it, to be completely frank, for a couple of reasons. Robin now works at the same public library I was working at the time, and Robin, I'm open to be corrected, but it's hard work in a public library. Resources are slim, and in the position I had, I was chief executive officer. It was 80 or 90% non-library things because the regional library runs all of its own accounts, its own finances, its own IT, its own networks. So you ended up doing a lot of non-library things. And that was very interesting for a while, but I really wanted to get back to what Catherine Harbaugh-Reid from Monash once called pure librarianship in academic libraries. So I went to RMIT. I was lucky to get the job in some ways. The Deputy Vice Chancellor of Education who interviewed me didn't understand that you're not supposed to move librarians between sectors. And I think she had some sympathy because she was Canadian, I'm originally North American as well, and we just clicked. So I'd like to say it was a careful career move. The fact was it was a have a go in some sense, and some luck that I got the right person interviewing me. And it went well. I'm not complaining about any of it, but it was, again, I wish I could say it was all tremendously good planning, but it was as much good luck. Mind you, I'd had quite a bit of involvement with ALIA previously, and I think that gave me a broader background than I might have had otherwise.
Thank you, Craig, particularly for highlighting the have a go aspects, of that transition. Thank you. So who would like to go next? Michelle, would you like to counter, given that Craig's already highlighted the contrast?
Sure, I can do the flip side. So
yeah, thank you.
Thanks, guys. So I started when I first graduated as a library tech in schools, but only for about less than a year, really. I just got some short-term contracts. And from there, I actually had a background before librarianship in law. I had a Bachelor of Law, and I'd done some work in community legal centres. So that sort of got me the foot in the door at Monash, and I ended up with the law library at Monash. So I kind of switched pretty early on into the academic libraries and really enjoyed my time at Monash. I was there for about 3 years. And then Deakin actually snapped me up, and I moved to Deakin for a year in the business and law faculty there as well. So using those same sort of knowledge and skills. And then I actually went overseas for a year, which was in 2019, because I thought I would take advantage while I can and go and adventure. And I'd always intended to come back to, possibly a role at Deakin or Monash in the tertiary sector. But of course, whilst I was overseas, the pandemic hit, and I was in Portugal and jumped on a plane a few days later and kind of found myself at my parents' house looking for work again. And I decided to cast the net wide, and I went back into thinking about what I was really interested in and what my skills kind of led me towards. And I was a bit lucky as well with timing and what was out there. And I've ended up back at the school library now for a year as the manager, the coordinator of East Doncaster.
Thank you, Michelle.
Luck and timing.
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, I'm just noting that you're the second person to mention luck. I might jump to Robin, if that's okay. I can see, Sarah, you're ready to go as well, and you'll be lucky last. But Robin, we might just transfer to you, given that also sort of tying with Craig's career path in public libraries. So Robin, over to you.
Thanks, Mary. Well, actually, I started out in academic libraries. So I started in Adelaide. I'm an Adelaide girl, and I worked in all 3 academic libraries in South Australia in various roles: cataloguing librarian, reference librarian, document delivery. But it was really hard work in South Australia at the time. This was late 90s to get a professional job, and it took a lot of effort, and mostly I had to take secondments. I ended up moving to public libraries in South Australia because I actually became quite, I suppose, I wasn't getting the roles in academic libraries, and a role came up in public libraries. I thought I'd give it a go. And it was very different. It was really hard work. And not to say academic libraries aren't, but as Craig said, it's not about that pure library work. And I really missed that pure library work. And so I actually only ended up about 12 months in public libraries. But then I actually had to move states. My partner is a highly specialised scientist, and I moved to Canberra because he got a job there. And I ended up working for ALIA, and that was an amazing experience and opened up so many opportunities for me because it showed me the value of networks, the value of understanding how to run a business. And it really brought back to me the work I did in public libraries. While not pure library work, actually, if I'd had some of this understanding, these skills, I would have had a more enjoyable time. Because while community is important, it's so many other underlying aspects. So I worked at ALIA for my entire time in Canberra, and then when I moved to Victoria, again, because my husband moved to Victoria, I started working for a vendor and really used my networks in that role. But it wasn't long before I was given the opportunity to be project director for the National Year of Reading in 2012. And what an experience that was. It was one of those things that I knew was never going to be long term, but if I was probably never going to get the opportunity to work on a national campaign ever again. And I just grasped it with both hands. And that came about because of my work at ALIA and my networks.
Thank you,
After
Robin.
that,
Sorry, just quickly, one question. Who was your employer for the National Year of Reading?
so I was actually self-employed.
Oh, right.
To do
Okay.
that, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
But I
Yep.
worked with Sue McKerricker. She headed up the
Yep.
National Year of Reading, and
Yep.
who's now CEO at ALIA. See, it all
Yep.
just moves around.
Yep, circles. Yep.
And then I moved to the State Library, where I've been for most of my time in Victoria, and I had 3 different roles there. And the first role was Senior Program Manager for our relationship with public libraries, which is a legislated relationship. And we did a lot of strategic projects for them. And I then worked in the creative enterprises team on startups and entrepreneurs. And then I moved to visitor services manager role. And it was interesting that during lockdown, my perspective changed, and I realized I wasn't that happy. And I decided to apply for the executive manager role at Yarra Plenty. And I really didn't think I'd get it. I just thought, I'm going to throw my hat in the ring. I'm not going to get it, but it'll be a really great experience if I can just get an interview. And I ended up getting the job. So luck, really, I think, does play a big part of it. And that was in stage 4 lockdown. So don't assume that, just because everything else around you seems to be going to poo, doesn't mean you can't make something good out of it.
That's a lovely note to end on. Thank you. And I'm noting that you also mentioned luck. And just as an aside, in case you don't see it, I'm just going to highlight that Claire O'Hanlon has commented that the National Year of Reading was one of the things that made Claire enroll in a Masters of Information Management. So you can take some responsibility for a job well done there, which is lovely, Robin. Thank you. And lucky last, Sarah, would you like to give us an overview of your current role and your career to date? Thank you.
Sure. So I've come from quite a different background. I had an academic background, came from the medical sciences, and had a classic sort of academic role with a teaching component, a research component. I was an HDR supervisor. And then, at a time when I had young children and was really struggling with that whole, research game and the bidding for funding, and it is. Look, maybe it was just my opinion, but I did find it harder as a mother trying to partition my time across all of those things and be able to put as much energy in, to winning those big grants. So I started to look around, and I was extraordinarily fortunate, so luck, that Monash had a model where they had learning skills advisors, so very teaching focused roles within the library. And I was thrilled. It was ongoing, not contract work, and I thought I'd give it a go. And I was lucky enough to get my first learning skills advisor role down at Peninsula, and being at a sort of a more distant library when the hub of things was sort of happening around Clayton Caulfield, I made a real point of getting to meet everyone on all campuses and sort of I guess being super inquisitive about the organisation. Once I was in the library, I suddenly realised the library is central to many things that happen, and I was never, I never stopped being fascinated by the incredible knowledge and skills and expertise within that. I thought I was leveraging well as an academic, and then realised that there was so much I didn't know, and so I think, to get where I've got, I proactively set aside time to get to know everyone and how all the functions worked in the library. I was always collaborative. I would go out to speak to academics with my hat on for everybody and find the opportunities, for data management or for whatever else that we could offer that to bring value to those particular academics. So I was constantly tapping into other parts. I joined library-wide and university-wide and sector-wide groups to sort of broaden my network. I've leveraged the Caval mentoring program, and I guess one of the skills I brought to it that probably has led me more into senior management now is that, coming from a medical sciences background, I have a passion for data. qualitative and quantitative. So in my teaching focused roles, I was sort of doing a bit of research around teaching practice. I was doing research in reproductive biology, which was my field. But I brought that ability to sort of analyse and tell the story of data to the business of libraries. And I guess it was really a way to transform the ways we engage with people, show people that would otherwise maybe not engage with us real impact on what the library can do. So yeah, I guess that's how I've got where I've got, and I've gradually worked my way up in management. So now I'm one of the associate directors here at the University of Newcastle.
That's fabulous. Thank you, Sarah, for that. And, just for the audience here, you can see that we've got quite a broad range of experiences. So please feel free to ask questions. I do have some questions that I'll be asking the panelists, but I'll also be fielding those Slido questions. So, and the link is in the chat if you haven't already seen it. Just a broad question for the panel members. I'm really noting that you've all touched on luck. You've all mentioned it. And I'm going to ask you, what role to what extent do you think you've made your own luck? How much of it is genuine circumstance, or how much of it is actually things that you've actually built throughout your careers, building networks, working for a range of employers, etc. So that's open to anybody for a response.
I'm happy to take that, Marion.
Yeah, thanks, Robin. Yep.
I think, when you started asking that question, my first instinct to say was to say, oh no, it was pure luck. You have to just be in the right place at the right time. And there's definitely an element of that. But actually, you really are right. You work hard to make that luck work for you. And I think, in thinking about this whole panel session, I was thinking, what is it that I've brought with me on, whenever, in all my jobs that I've done in all the different industries, and it's my networks. I've worked really hard to build my networks and to maintain those. And they may not have been the sort of reason for success early on in my career, but they've definitely helped me later on. And it's not about headhunting or anything, but it's about that recognition and that support, and people being willing to stand up and say, that person's really great. You'd be an idiot not to employ them. And I've just found, so I think definitely there is luck. Sometimes it is just about being in the right place at the right time, but definitely about making your own luck and building those networks and being prepared, being hungry for that job and being prepared to go for it.
That's great. Thanks, Robin. Any other comments?
I might jump in and say, look, while we call it luck, yeah, you're right, Robin. We do, I think there's a full commitment in everything I've done to continuous learning and continuous improvement. And I guess I want to demonstrate leadership from any role that I've had, and you can lead from any position. Honestly, it's about showing initiative, asking questions, bringing your ideas, giving feedback, and to a supervisor, to every problem you bring to them, bring at least 2 solutions. To have a think about it, and you can't do that unless you really deeply understand the organisation that you're in and how things work together. And I guess from what I call my luck is a dedication to trying to understand that and help the library get the best out of it, I suppose.
Thank you. That's great. Michelle or Craig, would you like to comment?
I can only add to what the other two have said about a combination of luck and circumstances. And I think working for the vendor and also in the public library as CEO gave me a lot of confidence. So I felt confident walking into the interview where I transited into the academic sphere. And my ALI involvement also meant I'd been talking to academic librarians before, so I had at least a rough idea of the issues and the things that were important in academic libraries. So yeah, as the other two have said, a combination of luck and sort of background work. Some of the things I did, it's hard to see the connection, but they only bore fruit maybe 10 years later. And there's an additive process. There's no one single thing that I did that suddenly makes a difference. It's a bit of this and a bit of that and a bit of luck.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. Michelle, you're nodding.
Yeah, so I totally agree with all of those statements. Like, networks, totally important. Kind of being in the right place at the right time, yes, but also thinking about where you want to be, in the future, and sort of deliberately thinking about what sort of skills you want to hone in on. So Sarah said she was really interested in data. So I'm sure she spent a lot of time sort of, you know, in the background working on those types of things. So for me, I was always interested in kind of working with students and, you know, teaching and training and technology and those types of things, which stood me in really good stead when I ended up going into these positions. It just so happened that it was good timing that this role came up at that time.
Yeah.
But, you know, we sort of done that background work to get there.
Yeah, thank you. And look, I'm glad that you touched on that, Michelle. There's a comment from the audience that someone has said luck plus right time and place. So, and then I guess being able to leverage those foundations that everybody's put in place. There is an actual question from the audience as well. So I'll put this to you. And there's a comment and it says, the luck sounds like opportunity and seeing that and being open to it. What advice do you have for how to build those networks to find the right opportunities? So it's not a specific question, so anybody feel free to jump in.
I just want to say one thing about, so not specifically with networks, but one thing that has come up a lot, and I think it's really important, is when you see the selection criteria. So the job I went for at the moment, and I think Robin mentioned this as well, that she put in something and just threw her hat in the ring, even though she thought she wouldn't get it. And it was the same with this role. I didn't have managerial experience at this point, and I thought, oh, well, I'll just put my hat in the ring. And a lot of the time people, you know, think I don't qualify because I don't fit, you know, 100% of every single criteria. So they don't put their hat in the ring. And I think, you know, doing something like that really makes a difference. Just putting in those applications, even if you think you might not, you know, fit every single criteria, you'd be surprised how many times you actually get an interview and do really well.
Yeah, fabulous. Thank you. Any other comments in relation to that?
I find talking to people really useful. Again,
Yep.
coming back to how I got the job at RMIT, I remember it was at ALA in the US, and I ran into Janine Schmidt, who was at University of Queensland at that stage. And for his personal stories, she mentioned she had to find a shoe store to buy some shoes for her granddaughter. So I walked around Toronto with her for half an hour or 45 minutes, something like that. Thought nothing of it at the time. I had nothing better to do. But it turns out the person that hired me at RMIT had worked with Janine previously. I'm quite sure she rang up Janine and said, hey, what do you think about this Anderson guy? And Janine would have been thinking, oh, walked around Toronto in the dark with him for 45 minutes. He can't be that bad. So it's serendipitous. And also the fact that I didn't go back to my hotel room and sit and read a book. I was happy to have a talk and a walk with Janine, who I only barely knew.
Yeah, it's sounding like making the most of the opportunities that come your way and being open to that and not being closed off to those opportunities. It looks like a bit of a theme amongst you all. Thank you. So any other comments about building networks to find the opportunities, Sarah or Robin?
Look, I think really what Craig was saying, it's, you know, when you say build your networks, it sounds very extensive. It sounds very scary. It sounds like you need to get up in front of lots of people, and it really isn't. It's about just meeting people and having conversations and being authentic. Sounds a bit, you know, rubbish really, but it is actually about that. It's, and for me, you know, my current manager, I hadn't worked with at all, but I got to know her through the National Year of Reading, which, you know, is almost 10 years ago. And what I realized once I got the job was she remembered me from that. And so it's, you know, and I think I sat in a restaurant and had a chat with her at the end of the National Year of Reading. She was on the sort of the advisory committee, the leadership team for it. And so I really didn't have huge amounts to do with her necessarily, but she got to know me at dinner one night. And it is those sorts of situations where don't stick with your friends or your mates or even your work colleagues when you go to a professional event. Try and get out there, make it a plan. I'm going to meet one new person and I'm going to have an interesting conversation. I'm just going to hear about them and learn from them. And, you know, I think if you just make that your goal each time and do get out, I mean, it's a bit hard at the moment, I know, but do try and get out and meet people or do this sort of thing and just see names and recognize names and start conversations and, you know, use whatever social media opportunities you've got.
Thank you. I mean, we're a famously introverted profession, but, you know, I think everybody can ask a question of someone else, you know, one question, that's all it takes to start the connections. Sarah, did you want to add anything before I move on?
Look, you know, you can never have a good enough network, I think. And from my background, I learned how to network through, you know, the conferences and the seminars and all of those things that you would go to as a researcher. And so probably the other thing I'd add is identify great mentors early and have good critical friends that can give you decent feedback as well. So there's networks, yes, so that you can have those conversations. But I noticed Claire Carlson's just jumped in. She was one of my early mentors, you know, and I asked, you know, how do you develop networks in this new field of mine when I'm not a librarian, and what would you recommend? And so, you know, seek guidance as well on how best to do that.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. There is another question from the audience that I'm going to put to everybody. It's not for anyone specifically, and that is, what triggered you to steer your career? Most people will stay in their comfort zone. So, yeah, none of you sound like people who are wanting to stay in a comfort zone. So, what were the triggers for you? Sarah, you're on screen, so you may as well go first. Thank you.
Look, for me, it was actually finding a sort of a lifestyle balance at the time. And one of the big questions I asked when I was offered the learning skills advisor position was, what is my career trajectory in a library when I, you know, don't necessarily have what would be traditional qualifications. And I got a pretty good answer from the learning skills manager at the time. And then I spoke to the directors there who were talking about, you know, some change that was afoot, and that there was a bit more openness to a broader skill set than librarian qualifications alone. And so I trusted, I took the risk, and I think most of us on this panel are not afraid of taking the risks. So yeah, and I've never looked back. I've absolutely loved it. It's I'll never get out of a library.
Oh, that's fabulous. Yay, we drew you in and kept you. It's fabulous. Any other panel members like to jump in about this one, their triggers for steering career?
I'm actually going to say that when I first started out, I actually wasn't, you know, a risk taker, and I thought academic libraries was my long-term career. And moving to public libraries demonstrated that perhaps I wasn't cut out for doing different things. You know, I had my comfort zone. Go back to your comfort zone, Robin. You know, what are you trying to stress yourself out for? So for me, when I left public libraries, I actually really struggled to get another academic library job in South Australia. It was a really tough market, as I mentioned. So for me, it was moving to Canberra really sort of shook things up for me. And getting the job at ALIA and working with the amazing Sue Hutley, who was the CEO at the time, just opened my eyes up to the possibilities. And that was the point when I started realizing there was so much more. That, yeah, I loved academic libraries, but actually the challenges and the issues and the great things about libraries were through all of the sectors. And I think that was the point for me that made me go, you don't have to pigeonhole yourself into one sector. You can do whatever you want, whatever looks shiny and new to you, you can go for. So that's why I'd say to people, like, just because you don't feel like you're a risk taker now doesn't mean you can't actually do that sort of thing, because that probably wasn't me to start with.
Yeah, thank you. And it sounds to me like there's some good reflection going on there as well, and not boxing yourself in, and really thinking about the decisions that you're making as part of that. Michelle or Craig, would you like to respond to that as well?
Sorry, both jumped at the same time.
Go, Michelle.
I just thought I'd briefly say, for me, I suppose I've always, I don't know, just really loved learning new things, I guess. So with jobs, often, you know, I get to a point where I think, oh, you know, I feel like I've learned things here and I want to learn more things, and I look for that sort of next opportunity to kind of keep growing and learning. And, you know, at the universities, I was spending time on computers a lot, and I found I really enjoyed working with people a lot, working with the students. And so I always thought I'd love to get back into the school libraries, because I just loved working with the students so much. So it just kind of led me in that direction, because that was something I wanted to keep building on.
Yeah, fabulous. Thank you. And Craig?
Yeah, I had an uncle who said an interesting thing to me. I ran into him, and I told him about a new job I'd had. It might have been when I went to Deakin. And he said, are you still learning new things? And I thought that was a really apt question. And it really said a lot to me. I said, yeah, I hadn't thought about it that way. And conversely, I worked for someone actually at Yarra Plenty who at one stage had 40,000 people literally working for him. He's in charge of manufacturing at Ford. And he said, it's time to go when you've seen all the problems before, when they all look familiar to you. And I thought they were both interesting approaches.
Yeah, very much. And, I think I'm seeing a theme of learning across all of the panelists as well. And, that's something we should all as professionals be able to engage with, is what we're about after all, isn't it? Lifelong learning. So thank you for that perspective as well. There's another question that's come up in the Slido that has a lot of support, and that is, how do you switch directions / broaden your experience when you've become quite specialised in a particular area but want to stay in the same organisation? Craig, you're on screen. Do you want to jump in and respond to
Um,
that one?
yeah, it may not be possible to do that in the same organization. Now, that can be hard if you're in a regional area and you're in an academic library.
Mm-hmm.
But having said that, changing organizations itself is good. I often hear people say, oh, I've had, I might have worked at the same place, but I've had lots of different jobs. But when you go to a different organization, things are really, truly are different in many
Yeah.
cases. So that's
Yep.
worth changing. And switching directions, I think, as Michelle or maybe Robin said, it's sort of a have a go at things and possibly applying for things that you may not be quite suitable for, especially if you, that's the advantage of the same organization. Hopefully they know you, trust your work, and having a go at secondments or temporary positions or special projects, anything that shows people that you can do more than that specialized area you're in.
Yeah, thank you. And as you're saying, I guess being open to switching organisations and all the benefits that can bring, even if it is on a secondment basis, and potentially being able to return to your home institution can give you that exposure. And Michelle, I believe you've done that. Was your role at Deakin a secondment? Is that right?
It was actually, yes.
Yeah.
Monash was quite open to offering secondments, and I was actually covering someone who was also on secondment.
Yeah.
who had
Yep.
moved into an IT role from the library. So secondments, I think, are a really fantastic opportunity where you can kind of test something out, and they'll be open to taking on someone who might not have as much experience because it's a short-term thing, and really seeing if you like it and seeing if your skills gel and that type of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Sarah or Robin, actually, Robin, you've got your mic off. Would you like to have any input into that question?
Yeah, I think for me, it's really focusing on the same organization. And I'm going to have to challenge you and say, why do you want to stay in the same organization? I've got staff who want to move up in their careers but want to stay with us, and like, that's an amazing thing from an organizational perspective. Of course, it's great to have that sort of culture, but sometimes there's strategies around recruitment that you may not understand. So for us right now, we do actually have a strategy around recruiting some of our manager positions to go externally, because there's been so much internal recruitment over a long period of time, and you need to get that balance of external and internal recruitment, because you need new fresh ideas coming in, but you also want to have career paths and really support the fantastic staff you've got. So if you happen to be wanting to move careers, or not careers, but move jobs within the same organization, you might be trying to do it at a time when the strategy around recruitment just doesn't suit that. So I would say to you, if that is something you want to do, move out, even if it's for a secondment, because Michelle is absolutely right. Secondments are amazing opportunities. So, if you can get a secondment outside the organization, then you can come back in. Then you're starting to demonstrate that you're best of both worlds. You've got the internal corporate knowledge, but you're actually bringing in fresh ideas from outside because you've given those sorts of jobs a go.
Thank you. And Sarah, I know you've had a few internal changes within organisations, but have you got any advice in relation to that?
Yeah, look, in my current position, I've got a number of very, very specialist people, and it is tricky. As Craig mentioned, we are a regional university, and it is about 2.5 to 3 hours to the next institution. So it's not, I acknowledge that secondments aren't always easy, particularly if you need to travel quite a distance or move. But it's a tricky one. Sometimes the best way to grow in your organisation is to get out of it and look at other ways of doing, other service models, other ideas. Like everyone has said, I'm not saying anything different, and come back with a broader view. But what I am saying here to other people is put your hand up for a secondment in another area. Go and shadow people in other areas. 'Cause there's a lot that you can do at a local level to learn about other functions. It's possible that managers might be able to negotiate a bit of an opportunity to work 1 or 2 days a week in a particular different area, just to expand your knowledge and your skills that way. So it's worth talking to managers about what might be possible to negotiate, and seeing whether you can do something at a local level. But if it's not too hard, and if there is the opportunity to head out and see other things, it is actually one of the better ways to go.
Thank you, Sarah. And I'm hearing again this theme of just ask, see what's possible, don't be afraid to ask. Okay, so we've got quite a few questions coming in on the Slido, guys. So I will move to the next one. So we have a popular question, which is that people are keen to hear more about transferable skills in public school and academic libraries, and how we can sell them, help those responsible for hiring realise them. So any advice about those transferable skills and how you demonstrate them to hiring managers? Who'd like to start? Robin, mic off.
There definitely are transferable skills, and probably in thinking about that, for me, the most, and these change, they're not fixed, they're not sort of what the transferable skills were 15 years ago going to be the same now. So I'm going to say some stuff like co-design, design thinking, partnership brokering, those sorts of skills, financial, not necessarily being, able to be a finance manager, but understanding, financial concepts and budgets, how to advocate. Those are all the sorts of skills that are transferable and are useful. Data, we all use data. In fact, I don't think librarians don't not like data. I think we love data secretly, even when we don't get to work in it very often. And so, but I was also just, I suppose, thinking, for me, I also employ for EQ, like emotional intelligence, attitude, self-awareness. And of course, that's not going to be everything, but for me, I can teach skills. I can't teach great teamwork, great communication skills, all of that. They're the sorts of skills I look for, and that you can bring across any industry.
That's fabulous. Thank you. Anyone else on the panel? Sarah, you've got your mic off.
I can't speak to public libraries because I've never worked in one. But if we're talking transferable skills, one thing I can say is there is always a language of the discipline that everyone understands. And I learned my special language in medicine, and then it took me a while to learn the special language in libraries. And I'll tell a hideous story. It took me 6 months before I was finally brave enough to ask what a monograph was. Someone said a book. I said, why don't you call it a book? Anyway,
good question. Yep.
But the truth is, something that you would take anywhere is taking your language of the discipline and being able to translate it out to any audience, an academic audience, a public audience. And I think that's something that's really important.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and perhaps mirroring the language that's given to you, and translating, that way. Craig, would you like to add anything to that question response?
No, it's the classic resume or covering letter question or KSC question. I suppose 2 ways to approach it. If you think you have close to it, demonstrating that. If you really don't think you have exactly what they're looking for, saying, I don't have this, but what I can bring is that. And sometimes it'll work and sometimes it won't. But being upfront about what you don't have that's standing out is not necessarily a bad thing, especially if you can bring something along to give the person reading that resume, I'll say, an excuse to bring you in.
Thank you. And Michelle, a bit more on selling those transferable skills.
Yeah, I suppose, so I moved from education to education in a sense. So there was still a bit of a nexus between what I was doing. But I think one of the things that's always stood out for me personally when I've moved between all my jobs is my technology skills. There's been all sorts of opportunities that have come up just because I've been able to use those sort of transferable skills, because technology, it's broad, but if you can, do any sort of things with technology, and you can really, talk the talk with that and build websites or build e-learning things, or, improve systems and improve efficiency, and, work with the technology systems that people have. It doesn't matter which one you know. You might not know the one that libraries using, but if you know technology, that's something across the board always been incredibly helpful for me. And just generally things like flexibility and problem solving, being able to collaborate with people, collaborating with the educators I've worked with, whether they're, professors at a university or teachers at a school, that brings in opportunities because, you're kind of reaching outside of the library and being able to do really amazing things that you might not have been able to do otherwise.
Yeah, fabulous. And you're highlighting the importance of digital dexterity, which, obviously has been a priority for Call and Cavallo in recent years. So, and for all of those reasons, if you can demonstrate that you can learn, then you can transfer that to another. Nice to have that counterpoint to obviously the importance of the soft skills as well. Michelle, while I have you, one of the questions is drawing on a comment you made earlier, and it is drawing on what Michelle said before about when you may not quite meet the key selection criteria for a role. Do you recommend acknowledging the experience gap in the application? And Craig, you touched on this before. So what's your approach been, Michelle?
Well, I suppose that's a tough one, actually. I mean, Craig might know better than me because I've never actually hired anyone. I've only come from the application side.
Yep.
So I've never specifically highlighted it. I've tried to come up with ways that I have. So, for example, this was a managerial role. I hadn't been a manager, but I had managed projects. I had done things that utilized the same skills as a manager, but I didn't necessarily done exactly what they wanted. So I tried to kind of pull the things that I had done and sort of map them out and show how those skills were things I could do if I had the opportunity to sort of, be given a chance.
That's great. Thank you. Craig, did you want to add anything to that, seeing as we referenced you?
Oh, just to support what Michelle said.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's a matter, I'm not sure how to put this, of giving that person doing the shortlisting, I'll call it an excuse, a reason to include you on the short list. Sometimes you look at an application and think, gee, I'd really like to include this person for some nebulous reason you can't put your finger on, but they just haven't given you enough. Usually a short list with other people as well. They haven't given you enough clear rationale for doing that, even though you dearly love to, if that makes sense. So part of it is luck too.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Sarah or Robin? Sarah, yep.
Yeah, look, I've gone for a couple of jobs where I perhaps didn't necessarily have the full skill set required, and this one is probably one of the most recent. I guess mine is more talking to senior management, and so I did have a lot of those, those transferable skills, people skills, collaboration, networking, managing partners, finance management, that sort of thing. But where I'm now overseeing an area around systems, and I guess what I talked to was the way I would approach it. In my interview, I did actually acknowledge that I know that there's a gap there, but because of the role I was going for, I said I would, I obviously have some very strong managers in my portfolio who do have, great detailed knowledge of these areas, and I would leverage their knowledge as well as and sort of explained how I would do those things. And it's enough to give the panel confidence that actually I can do it.
Fabulous. Thank you. Yeah. Robin.
And I think the final point I'd make, because I support everything that people are saying, that, it is recognizing the elephant in the room, I suppose, in that, you may not have all the skills and that's okay. But how do you sell what you do have that fits? So like Michelle said, she didn't have people management, she had project management and resource management. And there are very similar principles for some of that. But the other thing I would say is, remember that the people, the recruiters on the other side, they're often getting a lot of applications for jobs. And if you want to stand out, really think about how you sell yourself and how you sell those transferable skills, because it's actually really hard work reading through, trying to be really attentive and read through sometimes hundreds of applications and give everything you can to each application. And so it's really doing yourself a favor and thinking, well, I don't have all the skills. I need to demonstrate transferable, but I need to make it really clear don't tell me in 2 pages. I don't have the energy to read all of that. I really wish I did, but I don't. You need to be really succinct and get other people to look at your application. So to say, I don't have this skill, I'm selling these skills to demonstrate that. Do you buy it? You know, does that resonate with you?
Yeah, thank you. And just going back to tying together some of the comments that Craig made as well, Robin, I often think that as a recruiting manager, don't make the person who's reviewing your application do the hard work. They won't do it, or their system that they have in place won't allow them to do it. Don't make them join the dots. You've got to make it really explicit and clear for them. Yeah. And the other comment I guess I might add for people is that often a PD is a wish list. It can be a bit like looking for a unicorn. So don't be afraid not to apply just because you don't tick every key selection criteria.
Marion, on the back of that, can I just jump in and say,
of course, yeah,
it is a very, very smart thing to ring the hiring manager and discuss the position.
Yeah,
because often they've got a particular emphasis on some parts of that PD, and you might meet those.
Yeah,
and
thanks,
that's
Sarah.
that's what they really need. So you never know
Yeah.
until you call.
That's a really important point. So knowing what they're actually really prioritising and actually looking for. Thank you. All right. So I'm going to steer us to a slightly different direction and ask, when did you know it was time to make a transition to a new position and or organisation? And I know in some instances it was my husband was moving state. But apart from those external factors, when did you know it was time to make a transition? Anybody? Sarah?
For me, if I jump in, sometimes it was when I felt too comfortable.
Yeah.
When it was, and it's a bit like what Craig was saying before, when it was routine, when the changes were made and things were set in place, and and I felt like it was running like a well-oiled machine, and all of a sudden the energy and the challenge was running out a little bit, and I thought maybe it's time to look for a new challenge.
Yeah, that's kind of referring back to some of the comments Craig was making earlier, wasn't it? Yeah, being comfortable. Did you want to jump in there, Craig, and add anything to that?
A seemingly flippant comment, but it's Sunday night. It's when you're sitting there Sunday night thinking, oh, I've got work tomorrow. To me, that's a real trigger. And then it's time to start thinking otherwise. And I agree with Sarah. Personally, I've always found it when things are, put it this way, too much under control, when I can see what's happening, when it doesn't feel as challenging. It's a personal thing. If I'm not challenged, I get antsy.
Yeah, thank you. Robin, you want to add something to that?
Might be different for different people. And you have to work out what that looks like for you. And but for me, I get bored. And, when I get bored, I get stressed. And when, it's a different sort of stress. And it is the same as what Craig says, or you wake up in the morning, you go, oh, I just don't really want to go today. And so that's when I start going, I need something new and shiny. And that's when I start looking for something different. But I do think it's different for different people. But I think if you're starting to ask yourself, when is the time to move? Maybe now is the time to start looking. And you don't have to move straight away. Don't just jump for anything. Look and see what looks for you shiny and new and exciting, and that you want to give it a go.
Fabulous. Thank you. Michelle, would you like to add anything?
Oh, it's very similar. I think I agree with pretty much what everyone's saying. For me, I guess, there's not really much to add, really, actually.
Yeah, no, that's fine. That's fine. I'm hearing just a bit of a theme of self-awareness, a bit of reflection, and being conscious of what you're actually doing, and actually thinking about where you are in your career and being active in it. So thank you. And again, I've got another question that has risen up the list, which is also a bit tangential. And Michelle, I'll pose it to you first, seeing as you're here. But it says being authentic but being professional is a balance. It seems that wearing your heart on your sleeve can be counterproductive to progressing in a career, to me. Any thoughts on that?
That's a really interesting statement question.
And if I put you on the spot, feel free to ask for a minute. Yeah.
I think it is really important to be authentic and to have your personality come through, because nobody wants to hire a robot. I've often heard, people who are hiring people say, I connected with that person, on a personal level, and it was something about them as a person as well as their skills that sort of helped them get the job. But I think there's personality, and then there's being unprofessional. So I think, it's you can be authentic, but you still need to toe that line of what's professional. I'm not going to start doing all sorts of crazy things, or talking about all sorts of personal things maybe that aren't sort of right for the workplace. So it's kind of having, maybe you wear that funky jacket that you really like, or you've got your your personality coming through, but you still make sure that it's within the realm of what's considered professional for where you're working as well. And it's different at a school as it is at the university, how I would behave. Yeah,
that's a really good point. Yeah, thank you. Any other reflections on that, Robin? Your mic's off. Yeah.
Got to learn to stop turning my mic off, Marion.
Yeah, you do. It's a real signal to me to go.
I think for me, it's about being authentic professionally and then authentic personally, in your personal world. And so for me, being authentic professionally might be expressing myself in the way I dress, that's professional but still be individual, or it might be speaking my mind about a library value or challenging set values that we have, but in doing it in a respectful way. So I know that possibly was a career limiting move, but maybe not. I challenged the State Library CEO at a function, like not in front of people because that's disrespectful, but one-to-one, on her belief that libraries should be neutral. And I don't believe that libraries, or public libraries at least, should be neutral. And so we had a really respectful conversation. I don't think I changed her mind, but I felt like I was authentic but professional in doing so. And to be honest, I've got to the age now and the confidence level that it doesn't matter if I don't change that person's mind, and it doesn't matter if that person thinks, well, I don't actually want to employ her because she challenges me, because I then don't want to work with that person if that's their belief. So I think it's but I'm not going to be standing on the table, and I'm not saying anyone would do this, but it is about what would I do in my personal life, and and how would I, because I'm a bit sweary in my personal life. I'm not sweary in my professional life. So it's finding that, what does professional look like for you?
Thank you. And look, we do only have a couple of more minutes, so I'm going to just quickly switch to our final question, and I'm going to ask a response from everybody for this. So, because I think it's a great question. Is there any really good advice you've received from mentors along the way that sticks with you now? So anybody happy to jump in? Anything coming to mind?
And I can't even remember who told me this, but I tell people this now. It's become part of my what I say: treat interviews like an exam, and revise, practice, research, role play, everything. Treat it like an exam. Don't think that you'll wing it, because you're never going to wing it. And if you do wing it, then I don't know, maybe we'll just be really jealous of you, but you may not win that one interview that you want. And I had that attitude. I used to think, but I can't be authentic if I practice. Well, that's actually not being authentic. It's being professional and respectful, and treating the panel like, respected colleagues, because you've practiced and you don't know all the answers, and you don't know all the questions they're going to ask, but you've got a sense of what they're looking for and you've researched it. So that would probably be my one piece of advice.
That's fabulous. Thank you, Robin. Craig, mic's off.
Yeah, lots of good advice, but it's always been contextual, incremental, and I could give you bits of it, but it wouldn't make sense to anyone else out of their context. I think listening, it's only recently I've realized how often people were giving me advice and I didn't even hear it as advice. So I should have been listening more carefully. At the time I think, well, that's what they actually meant then.
That's fantastic. Thank you. Sarah.
Yeah, I do have my mic off.
Yeah.
So just on the interview front, so I'll share two. On the interview front, don't be afraid if you don't meet all the criteria. The things we've said, call the hiring manager, find out what's important. And even if you think you might fall short, go for it, because while interviews should be treated like an exam, they are also a fabulous learning experience. And I once went for an interview where I saw immediately halfway through the interview that I was quite a way off the job I was going for, but that's okay. It actually showed me my gap. And then it helped me to reset and really think about my learning goals going forward to breach that gap and actually to get there eventually. So that was one thing. The other thing, just because I can still see Claire Carlson's name up there, and I don't know why I want to bring this up, but it comes down to respectful challenge that Robin was talking about earlier. It was around choosing what's worth it to challenge.
Mhm.
You know, I mean, there might be many, many things that you might disagree with from time to time, but which one is the most important that's actually really going to make an impact if you challenge this and you have that important conversation? Yeah, it was great advice, because it every now and again I go, you know, I think, is this the one that I should really challenge, and what am I trying to achieve here? And if it is, then I go right in.
That's fabulous.
Be
Thank
brave.
you. Michelle, final word to you. No pressure.
Well, I guess I wanted to say that, and Adele brought this up in, I think, the event number 1, keep notes. You do a lot of stuff over a lot of time, and it's invaluable keeping like a record of your achievements, so that when you go to those interviews, you don't have to scramble to try and remember all the great examples that you have. So keep notes, build relationships. There's so many people, so many names here that I see that I think, oh, I love these people. I've worked with these people, and it really makes a difference, sort of building those relationships and really giving back and getting to know everybody in the field. And back yourself. The only thing that's kind of standing in your way half the time is your lack of self-confidence to give it a go. So if you just kind of can get past that, you're already halfway there.
Thank you so much, and thank you everybody for that wonderful advice. It's all resonating with me, and I really appreciate it. It is 1:29, so that's going to draw to close the panel part of the session, and I will hand back to Neri in just a moment to close for us. So apologies to all of you people who put some questions in Slido that we didn't manage to get to. I'm getting the sense that we could have gone on for another hour, but that's probably too much to ask for all of our panelists. And so I really would like to thank you all very much for your time today and for your preparation. You all did prepare, you all showed up, and you modeled all of these things that we're telling people to do. And at the risk of singling someone out, I do particularly want to thank Craig Anderson, because you may or may not all be aware, but Craig actually retires at the end of this week. So this is probably his last public outing and opportunity for us as a profession to hear from him. So thank you very much, Craig, for your time and wisdom over the years. Much appreciated.
Thank you, Marion, and thank you all for being such a good audience. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for everybody for your participation. So Neri, over to you to wrap up, please. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you very much to all of our panelists and our facilitator for your engaging and inspiring conversation. Thanks also to everyone who asked questions and attended. I'd like to thank the PDIG committee for organising the event. Feel free to contact the speakers with any further questions you may have after the webinar. You can send an email to members@caval.edu.au, and Sarah will provide you with the contact details. I'd also like to mention that PDIG and Caval are continuing the initiative started in 2020 and have arranged for native trees to be planted through the organisation 15 Trees as a thank you to our speakers. All attendees will also receive an online survey, which we would really appreciate if you can fill in order to help us plan future events. And finally, please keep an eye out for the next Caval event, which will be the joint CRIG PDIG virtual forum at the end of May. Program details will be finalised shortly, and you will be able to find all the details on Caval's website. We look forward to seeing as many of you then as possible. Thanks again, everyone.
Thank you.